Since 1981, Capital People First has inspired independence and promoted self-determination for countless Californians with disabilities. Throwing off labels like mentally retarded and low functioning, this small group of individuals with developmental disabilities has led lives of dignity, insisting that people like themselves have a chance and a choice in life.
I never heard about Capital. I didn't know anything about advocacy. A good friend of mine asked me one day, come to Capital People First, and I was hooked. I never heard about Alta, never, okay? So I went to a Capital People First meeting. They kept saying, Alta is the Alta. I finally said to somebody discreetly, what in the heck is Alta? Once they told me what they did, I go, can I have the information? Got the information, and I never looked back.
Well, my first Capital, I was like, I couldn't say anything. I was shy. I didn't know about self-advocacy. I didn't know about People First, what People First was. But it was a gradual process. It didn't happen overnight. Well, we'd also learned from other groups who had been oppressed that getting together gave you a voice, gave you, we all knew the purpose, but we didn't know how to make the purpose work.
Nobody would listen, not a parent, but to have someone listen that was so efficient. I couldn't decide to join People First or not, and I was already started Penn 11. And so I say, are we going to be concerned to paint the room, or are we going to change and be a voice? If we're going to be a voice, I'm going to be involved. If we're not, I don't want to be involved.
It's the case of Infant Doe. Infant Doe's parents refused permission for life-saving medical treatment, allowing their child to die rather than face life as a mentally retarded adult.
I see something like that or hear something like that, I don't want that to happen to another child. Because they're too precious and too loving to be able to just to die like that.
Why anyone ask us what is best for us? Everybody go there and look good and say, we know best what's retarded, we know it's good for you. And I said, hogwash. Ask us. Ask us. Ask for what do we want.
I'm so frustrated that these people think they know everything about us. And they have got the wrong information about us.
Growing from the independent living movement of the 1970s, self-advocacy groups organized by people with developmental disabilities began to be heard around the country. Capital People First was founded as one of the first in California. Members recognized that their own experience as victims of mistreatment and discrimination gave them strength to stand up for themselves and for others. Because of this, Capital People First was soon asked to talk to other people with developmental disabilities across the state, to have conversations about their lives and their futures and report on what they learned. That had never been done before. And as it turned out, the trip gave Capital People First a mission for the next 25 years. They called it Surviving the System, Mental Retardation, and the Retarding Environment.
Retarded environment to me, as I witnessed it, it was closing off opportunities to those who were in that environment, like a state institution or a day program or any other program.
Capital People First's insistence on equal opportunities for living and working in the community, along with everyone else, led to advocacy in larger political arenas. They spoke up for consumer participation on advisory committees and community councils. Members joined statewide organizations and boards of directors like the State Council on Developmental Disabilities and Protection and Advocacy, leading the way for policy making by individuals with developmental disabilities.
It is important to be policymakers. It is important to sit on board. It is important to sit on committees to share your voice, but also get information and share with others.
They also shared their People First message out of state and in Canada. One Capital People First member was invited to join the President's Committee on Employment of People with Disabilities. In 1990, they traveled to Washington, D.C. for the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act and had the privilege of meeting with President George H.W. Bush. Recognized for their activism in California and outside the state, Capital People First was honored to share its advocacy message in Japan to promote People First in the global community. This began a tradition of friendship, exchange, and learning between persons with disabilities in California and those from Japan.
So we told them all about the other people's self-advocacy groups and Capital People First, and maybe help each other start a self-advocacy movement in Japan.
Moving on with their work at home, Capital People First began a peer advocacy project to help people with their individual program plans. With protection and advocacy, they designed a poster on the rights of people with developmental disabilities, with easy-to-understand words and pictures, the first of its kind. They helped write textbooks and been included in disability histories, but always learning, teaching, and leading. And then there was Sandra, another founding member of Capital People First. She unfortunately suffered from a degenerative heart condition until she became so ill she was forced to seek organ transplants.
Well, she wanted a heart and lung transplant, but she was denied the heart and lung transplant because of her Down syndrome. Why doesn't she have the right to have a heart and lung transplant? So then we decided that she at least deserved the assessment to get a heart and lung transplant, at least put her on the list, because she wanted to make political and moral change in the community too.
Because of this work, Capital People First joined a landmark lawsuit, Caulfield versus the Department of Developmental Services. It was settled years after with impact across the state that increased community-based choices for Californians living in state institutions.
Capital People First signed on to the lawsuit so people could have better chances to win out of the community. Because if not, we would all be stuck in our houses or in the institutions.
10 years later, they joined another lawsuit in Capital People First versus the Department of Developmental Services, also aimed at assuring more choices for people with developmental disabilities to live in their communities.
We felt as a group that it was necessary to give power behind the voices that were trying to be heard. What I mean is, we heard the voices, but nobody else were. We were being heard in the community more than they were. So we were the voice to everybody else.
Mr. President and members, this month marks the 20th anniversary of Capital People First, one of the very first advocacy organizations for and by persons with developmental disabilities to be established in this country. People First was organized with two goals: to assure the availability of services, training, and support needed by persons with developmental disabilities, to maintain and increase their capacity for independence. And secondly, to demonstrate to the rest of the community at large that persons with disabilities are people first and not to be defined by their disabilities. I'd like to introduce Connie Martinez, who's a founding member of People First, Tom Hopkins, a founding member, and Kay DeMaio, mother of founding member Sandra Jensen. Please join me in welcoming them.
Welcome to Chesco, special guest. Nice to have you here.
I also have, there's a person who just arrived who many of us are very familiar with, Carolyn Negrete, mother of founding member Roberto Negrete, who we all fondly remember as Bear. Please welcome
Welcome
Carolyn.
back, Carolyn.
Capital People First is important to me because people need to be able to speak up for themselves, and I want to be able to teach people how to do it.
For 30 years, Capital People First members have contributed as peer leaders, teachers, and policymakers, participating in new advocacy projects for persons with disabilities, or as ordinary community members who demonstrate each day what can be accomplished in life outside the retarding environment.
And so teaching people, we each became teachers to each other and to the other people with disabilities.
Capital People First has had struggles and accomplishments and 30 years of happiness.
Change expectations of everyone, and it's amazing what we can do.